Power to Change is about learning by sharing knowledge and experiences within our communities and our education settings. A key part of the Climate Education Clubs is listening to community groups, addressing challenges identified together and designing solutions together. We met with Sligo Cycling Campaign to learn about their advocacy work and the benefits of cycling. They shared interesting project proposals that would be of benefit as they strive to achieve cycling for all.
I'm Joan Swift and I'm chairperson of Sligo Cycling Campaign, and I'm also on the Secretariat of Sligo Public Participation Network. The Cycling Campaign advocates for cycling to be possible, for it to be a choice, so that we have the type of infrastructure that means that anybody, whether they're young or old, could hop on their bike and go wherever their business takes them. We're interested in the idea that all over Sligo, but particularly around Sligo town, that there could be cycling for all ages and abilities. So we do that, and we work in two different ways. One would be advocacy, making submissions. For example, the Sligo County Climate Plan is here. We made a submission to that in relation to transport. We made a submission to the local transport plan, which was part of the county development plan. And the other aspect then is to organise events. So we try to involve different groups. So we've had, for example, a couple of biodiversity cycles, but our main interest is in everyday cycling, so that you could cycle to school, you could cycle to the shop, you could cycle to meet your friend for a coffee, you could cycle to work and so on. And with the advent of e-bikes, that is becoming more and more feasible for more and more people. That's one of the issues, that a number of people with e-bikes would be nervous about parking just anywhere. So let's say one of the things that we would advocate for would be secure parking. What we find when we chat to people is that there are people who would cycle themselves, but maybe their partner doesn't cycle, or they certainly wouldn't let their children cycle. So if you keep the cycling for all in mind, well, then you have to think, would I let my 7-year-old do this? And that would be a kind of a target that you're not designing for the confident cyclist who cycles already. You're designing for the person who will cycle in the future if the infrastructure is better. A lot of people don't actually know how you would go about cycling around Sligo town because of the one-way system. It's not always obvious what the routes should be. Somebody at a recent consultation suggested like maps you could download. Signage again would go with that. And then what I mentioned earlier, the bike parking, particularly for e-bikes or more expensive bikes. The Sheffield stands are okay for ordinary purposes, but really you need kind of secure indoor type parking, and in some countries they repurpose maybe a retail space that's no longer in use or something like that. So if you can do something that's of a very high standard and that people start to use it, it maybe starts to change people's minds then about, this cycling is really possible. And even when I'm saying that we campaign for cycling for transport, but it's about so much more. You notice so much when you're on a bike. It's sociable, you meet people, you observe things, whether you're talking about, in the urban or rural areas. And of course it's very good for health, and if you can incorporate it into your day-to-day activity rather than say, I never got my walk today, or I never did such a thing, when you're already exhausted after a day's work. Whereas if you've had your cycle, if you've fitted it in around what you're doing anyway, it can work very well.